What happens when an entitled HOA Karen takes her power trip too far? When a simple neighborhood dispute turns into a full-blown suburban war. Imagine getting fined for a mailbox color, having your grass measured with a ruler, and, believe it or not, watching someone call the cops on a farm for having animals. But karma? Oh, karma had other plans. Stick around because this is the hilarious downfall of the most notorious HOA Karen ever. And trust me, you won't believe how it ends. Hello beautiful people. Before we dive in, a small click from you can help us reach 1,000 subscribers. Hit that subscribe button and be part of the journey. Let's go. It was a peaceful neighborhood. Well, mostly peaceful. The kind of place where everyone waved at each other while walking their dogs, where kids rode their bikes without a care in the world, and where the biggest controversy was whether the community Christmas lights should go up before Thanksgiving. It was the picture of suburban harmony. And then, there was Karen. Karen was the self-appointed queen of the cul-de-sac. Armed with a clipboard, a superiority complex, and an uncanny ability to spot an HOA violation from 3 houses away, she ruled the neighborhood with an iron fist. Or at least she thought she did. If there was a blade of grass out of place, she noticed. If a mailbox was an unapproved shade of beige, she took immediate action. And God help anyone who dared to leave their trash cans out a second past collection time. I had lived in the neighborhood for a few years, keeping to myself, paying my dues and following the actual HOA rules, which were honestly pretty reasonable. But Karen had her own set of rules, ones that she enforced with the zeal of a medieval inquisitor. I first crossed paths with her when she knocked on my door, a scowl already plastered on her face. In her hand was a violation notice, my first one ever. I opened it, expecting to see something about an unpaid fee or a genuine oversight on my part. Instead I read, "Your mailbox does not match the neighborhood aesthetic. Please correct this issue immediately." I blinked at the paper, then at Karen, who stood there tapping her foot impatiently. My mailbox?" I repeated. "Yes," she huffed. "The HOA guidelines clearly state that all mailboxes must be painted in approved neutral tones." "It is neutral," I pointed out. "It's 2 shades too dark," she snapped. "And it's bringing down the uniformity of the street." I looked over her shoulder at the row of mailboxes, all of which were slightly different shades of beige, gray, and brown. But Karen wasn't done. "Oh, and you have an unauthorized garden gnome," she added, her voice dripping with disapproval. I turned my head toward my front yard, where a small, cheerful-looking gnome sat among my flowers. He wasn't hurting anyone. He wasn't loud. He wasn't violating any actual rule. But Karen didn't care about logic. Karen cared about control. That was the moment I realized I had become her latest target. And this was just the beginning. I should have known that giving Karen even a hint of resistance was a mistake. It was like challenging a raccoon to a staring contest. She wasn't going to back down, and she was definitely going to come back with reinforcements. The day after our mailbox confrontation, I found another notice taped to my front door. "Grass exceeds HOA-approved height limit." I stared at my lawn. It looked fine. Normal even. Not the pristine golf course perfection Karen probably dreamed about, but certainly not jungle levels. Then, like a bad omen, I spotted her. Standing at the edge of my driveway, hands on hips, eyes narrowed in suspicion. "You're lucky I didn't fine you this time," she called out, her voice carrying across the yard. "But you need to mow it immediately." "I mowed it 3 days ago," I replied because I had. "Well, it looks like it's over 3 inches, she sniffed. 3 inches? Was she serious? I wanted to ask if she carried a measuring tape around like some kind of lawn inspector, but I had a sinking feeling the answer was yes. And sure enough, a few days later I caught her measuring my grass. At 6:30 in the morning. I peered out my window in disbelief as she kneeled on the sidewalk, ruler in hand, pressing it against random patches of my lawn like a detective at a crime scene. She stood up, scribbled something in her little notebook, and shook her head in disappointment. I half expected her to drop to her knees and whisper, "This is a tragedy." But the grass wasn't enough. Oh no. Karen had bigger plans. One afternoon I walked outside to find yet another notice on my door. This time it read, "Unauthorized trash can placement. Immediate correction required." I frowned. I had put my trash bins on the curb exactly where they were supposed to be. I checked my security camera footage. There she was, in all her clipboard-wielding glory, moving my trash can a few inches to the left, then taking a picture as proof that I had violated the rules. She staged the crime scene. That was when I realized. This woman wasn't just enforcing HOA rules. She was making them up as she went. And it was only going to get worse. I could have mowed the lawn again. I could have adjusted the trash can placement by a fraction of an inch. I could have removed the gnome and repainted my mailbox in Karen-approved beige. But where's the fun in that? No, if Karen wanted a battle, I wasn't going to roll over and let her rule the neighborhood like a deranged suburban dictator. I was going to follow the rules, to the letter. And I was going to do it in a way that made her absolutely miserable. First, I carefully reviewed the actual HOA guidelines. Turns out, nowhere did it say that garden gnomes were banned. Nowhere did it state that trash cans had to be placed at an exact angle. And the grass? As long as it was maintained, there was no official height restriction. So I got creative. The mailbox incident. Since Karen had an issue with the shade of my mailbox, I decided to make it as regulation-friendly as possible. I went to the exact paint supplier listed in the HOA guidelines and bought that approved color. But I didn't stop there. Oh no. I added a small, barely noticeable decal on the side that read Karen's favorite mailbox. She saw it the next morning. And lost her mind. "You're being childish," she seethed, standing on my driveway with her arms crossed. "Karen, it's the exact approved color," I said innocently. "Is there a problem?" She opened and closed her mouth like a goldfish, then huffed and stormed off. The lawn drama. Since she was obsessed with my grass, I bought a ruler and personally measured it every morning. I even put up a tiny sign that read, "Grass, HOA compliant, Karen approved," just to make sure she knew. The trash can shenanigans. Since she wanted my trash can in a specific location, I took it a step further. I marked the exact placement with tape on my driveway and labeled it HOA Karen's certified trash can zone. Neighbors started noticing. And laughing. I started getting nods of approval. Tom from next door stopped by just to say, "I love what you're doing. Keep going." And Karen? She was seething. But I wasn't done yet. Because while I was following every actual rule, Karen was breaking one herself. And she didn't even know it yet. Word traveled fast in the neighborhood, and soon Karen's reign of terror became the hottest topic of discussion. It started with small whispers. Neighbors would glance over their fences, share knowing looks, and shake their heads whenever Karen strutted by with her ever-present clipboard. The more I pushed back, subtly, legally but oh so petty, the more people started paying attention. Tom from next door was the first to openly crack. One afternoon, as I was carefully measuring my grass for compliance, he strolled over with a beer in hand and smirked. "She came after me last week," he said. "Told me my garden hose was an unauthorized color." "What color is authorized?" I asked, genuinely curious. "No idea," he shrugged. "But apparently neon green is an eyesore." It turned out I wasn't the only victim. Karen had been waging her personal war for years, terrorizing neighbors over things like unapproved wreaths, unregistered lawn chairs, and excessive holiday decorations. Mrs. Patterson, the elderly woman across the street, whispered, "She made me remove my wind chimes. Said they were a public disturbance." Another neighbor, Jake, rolled his eyes. "She knocked on my door at 7 a.m. because my car was parked too diagonally in my own driveway." And then my favorite. "Last week," Tom lowered his voice, "she tried to fine me because my cat was trespassing on her lawn." I nearly choked. "She reported your cat?" "Yep. Filed an official complaint with the HOA." They laughed at her. But she was serious. The more stories I heard, the clearer it became. Karen wasn't just an annoyance, she was an epidemic. And the neighborhood was ready for a cure. People started to push back in small ways. Tom got a second garden hose, this time in a color even brighter than the first. Mrs. Patterson put her wind chimes back up, and added 2 more for good measure. Jake parked his car at an even sharper angle just to spite her. And then the most glorious act of defiance. Someone, an anonymous hero, left a tiny pink flamingo in Karen's front yard one night. It wasn't much. Just a single plastic flamingo. But it drove her insane. The next morning she stormed up and down the street demanding to know who did it. No one confessed. People just shrugged, smirked, and went about their business. For the first time in years, Karen realized she was losing control. And she was not going to take that lightly. Because when entitled people feel threatened, they don't back down. They escalate. And Karen was about to go nuclear. Karen was losing it. The anonymous flamingo had sent her into a spiral. She started patrolling the neighborhood like a security guard on high alert, peeking over fences, scribbling furiously in her little notebook and muttering to herself. She even began taking pictures of people's houses, like she was gathering evidence for some kind of suburban courtroom showdown. Then came the HOA meeting. Karen arrived early, binder in hand, ready to present her list of neighborhood crimes. She had printed photos, violation reports, some of which she had obviously written herself, and even a chart tracking infractions over the past 6 months. She slammed the binder down on the table. "This community is in chaos," she declared, eyes wild with determination. The HOA board members, who had been dealing with Karen's antics for years, sighed collectively. "What exactly is the issue now, Karen?" one of them asked, already sounding exhausted. Karen flipped through her binder dramatically. "Where do I start? The mailbox situation is completely out of control. We have people," she shot me a glare, "mocking HOA regulations." A few muffled chuckles spread across the room. She huffed and kept going. "There are unauthorized garden ornaments. I saw a second wind chime on Patterson's porch. There's an entire neon green hose corrupting our neighborhood aesthetic." Tom gave me a thumbs up from the back row. "And worst of all," she paused for effect, "someone is leaving illegal flamingos on my lawn." At this point, the HOA president pinched the bridge of his nose like he was getting a migraine. "Karen, are you seriously calling this an emergency?" "Yes," she shrieked. The room erupted in laughter. Karen's face turned beet red. "This is a mockery of the rules," she sputtered. The HOA president sighed. "Karen, this meeting is meant for serious community concerns, things like safety, maintenance, and budgeting. Not flamingos." Karen's eye twitched. Then, in a final act of desperation, she pulled out her secret weapon, a report she had filed with the police. That's right. Karen had actually called the cops. And not just for the flamingo. She had reported a local farm, just outside the neighborhood, because she claimed their animals were too loud and disruptive to the community. Wait, I raised a hand. "Are you telling me you called the police on a farm?" "It's a nuisance," she shrieked. "Those animals are making noise at all hours of the day. It's a violation." "Karen," the HOA president said, clearly trying not to laugh, "it's a farm. It's been a farm. Long before this neighborhood even existed. They wake me up in the morning." "That's what roosters do, Karen," someone muttered. The HOA board dismissed her complaint immediately. But Karen wasn't done. If the HOA wouldn't take action, she would. That's when she made her biggest mistake yet. She decided to trespass onto the farm. And it was all caught on camera. The morning after the HOA meeting, Karen did something no sane person would even consider. She marched down to the local farm, the one she had reported to the cops, and decided to take matters into her own hands. Armed with her clipboard and a completely unwarranted sense of authority, she slipped past the front gate and started yelling at the animals. That's right. She actually stood in the middle of a working farm and lectured the livestock about noise pollution. "You are in violation of community sound ordinances," she shouted at a group of completely indifferent chickens. "This is a residential area." The farmer, a gruff but good-natured man named Hank, walked out of the barn and blinked at the scene before him. There was Karen standing in his field, pointing her pen at a very unimpressed goat. "Ma'am," Hank said, scratching his head, "what exactly are you doing on my property? You need to control your animals." Karen snapped. "They're disturbing the neighborhood." Hank glanced at his own property, then back at Karen. You do realize you're standing on a farm, right?" "It doesn't matter," she shrieked. "Your animals are violating noise regulations. If you don't do something about it, I will be forced to file another report." That's when Hank pulled out his phone. "Ma'am, I'd recommend you stop talking and start leaving," he said casually, tilting his camera toward her. And just like that, Karen was caught on video trespassing on private property, harassing farm animals, and threatening to call the authorities over chickens doing chicken things. Hank, being the brilliant man he was, uploaded the footage to Facebook. And within hours the entire neighborhood saw it. Karen's reign of terror was over. By the next HOA meeting, the evidence was overwhelming. The trespassing charges alone were enough to get her in serious trouble. But when combined with her history of fake complaints, her staged violations, and her general insanity, the HOA had finally had enough. They revoked her position of self-appointed enforcer. They issued her multiple violation notices of her own. And the best part? She was fined for unauthorized holiday decorations, the same ridiculous complaint she had tried to use against everyone else. The cherry on top? The HOA president, with the biggest smirk imaginable, handed her the violation notice and said, "Karen, this is an HOA community. We have rules." For the first time in history, Karen had nothing to say. And the neighborhood? The entire street celebrated by putting up even more flamingos. Karen was finally defeated. For the first time in years, the neighborhood could breathe freely. No more surprise violation notices. No more clipboard patrols. No more ridiculous complaints about trash cans, grass height, or unauthorized garden gnomes. The change was almost immediate. Mrs. Patterson put 5 more wind chimes on her porch just because she could. Tom installed a neon green mailbox, completely HOA approved but visibly painful for Karen to look at. And as a final act of rebellion, someone, possibly an anonymous group of neighbors, placed a full army of pink flamingos on their lawns, turning the entire street into a Karen-triggering masterpiece. The best part? Karen couldn't do a single thing about it. After her public humiliation, she tried to regain control. She wrote complaint letters, but the HOA ignored them. She sent out emails demanding decorum be restored, but no one responded. The power she once had? Gone. Eventually, she did the only thing left to do. She moved out. One morning, without warning, a moving truck pulled up to Karen's house. By sundown, she was gone. And the neighborhood? Thrived. People chatted more freely, no longer afraid of being reported for minor infractions. Kids played outside without Karen glaring at them from her window. The whole place felt lighter. I took a deep breath, stood on my lawn, and admired the Karen-free horizon. For the first time in a long time, the grass grew a little taller. The mailboxes stood proudly in various shades of beige. And the garden gnomes? They sat happily in the yards, watching over a neighborhood that had finally reclaimed its peace. I smiled. We had survived the Karen era. And we had won.